All right, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. The live is on Facebook, so we'll just go ahead and get going. So hello and welcome everyone to the Cancer and COVID-19 Indigenous Medicines to Support Healthy Immune and Respiratory Systems discussion. I'm Chris Johnson. My family and I are Dakota from the Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota in South Dakota. And I'm the Prevention and Policy Manager at the American Indian Cancer Foundation. And so at AICAF, we remain dedicated to our mission to eliminating the cancer burdens Indigenous people face while maintaining our commitment to reducing the spread of the coronavirus. This chat is a part of a series of chats with leading experts across Indian country, where we address Indigenous health issues related to cancer and COVID-19. And so before we begin, we want to know where everyone is joining us from today. So if you can please answer in the poll box. And for those of you who are joining us on our Facebook live streaming option, you can answer down below in the comment section. So I think we'll just give it a couple of minutes and see where everyone is coming from. So I see North Dakota, Minnesota. Yeah, so I think Rapid City, South Dakota. So we have a lot of Midwest folks here, Michigan. So yeah, we want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to join in on this conversation. We hope to leave room for questions at the end of the discussion. So please ask questions in the chat box or leave a comment below if you're on the Facebook live option. We'll be sure to address them at the end. And if we're unable to, due to time, we'll follow up with you. I know Gary and I are going to share a lot of good resources at the end. And so today we are joined by Dr. Gary Ferguson, who is our AICAF board chair. And so Dr. Gary Ferguson is a licensed naturopathic doctor living in Anchorage, Alaska. For the past 16 years, Dr. Ferguson has worked across Alaska to address the social, economic, cultural, and environmental factors that contribute to the health and well-being of Alaskans. He's a facilitator, motivational speaker, and technical consultant to communities and agencies around how to more deeply address contributing factors to health and well-being. He's Aleut and Unangan, originally from the Unangan Islands community of Sandpoint, Alaska. Dr. Ferguson's past positions include providing clinical services to his home region at Eastern Aleutian Tribes and serving at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium as the Wellness and Prevention Director and Senior Director of Community Health Services. His most recent work includes serving at the Rural Alaska Community Action Program as the Chief Executive Officer prior to becoming a Healthy Communities Consultant. So welcome, Dr. Ferguson, and thank you for your generosity of time to join us in this important discussion today about what's currently going on in the world and how our Indigenous communities can come together to support one another during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good morning, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Can you see me as far as, am I on the main screen right now, or do we need to shift? Just see.
I think it's, yep, so we can see you getting some comments back in the chat, so we're good.
Okay, good. Okay, great. So I can see you. My view is you, Chris, and I'm loving that this morning here. Chris is coming into us from Phoenix, Arizona, and he was just reporting how unseasonably hot it is, and I think that's a really great segue as we look at climate change. And on a planetary level, you know, we're experiencing things that we've never experienced before as human people, as Indigenous nations. And, you know, there's a lot of wisdom that we have to fall back upon when we look at not only surviving this current COVID-19 crisis and pandemic, but also coming up with ways that we can work with not only each other as far as helping us be as healthy as possible, but also on a planetary level to really look at what can we do to help heal the earth. A lot of our philosophies as Indigenous people across the nation speak to, when the earth is sick, we're sick. And I feel like right now, Mother Earth, she's struggling. And the virus, I feel, is a part of this larger picture of opportunity for us to really look at our lifestyles and reawaken and reconnect with our Indigenous roots, our ancestral wisdom. Our ancestors are here for us to learn from, and it's a really powerful time for us, I feel. So I'm really honored to share this morning, and I'm zooming in from Anchorage, Alaska here. We have a beautiful sunny day, and it's supposed to be close to 50 today, so we're loving the spring weather and all of the plants that are coming up. I'm seeing throughout Facebook and across the nation, actually, all of my friends across the nation, there's this huge interest in and reawakening of our connection to our Indigenous medicines, our plants, our foods as medicine. And I feel like, to me, that's the most exciting thing. There's so much opportunity to learn. And for those of us that maybe didn't grow up with a connection to our traditional foods, our medicines, our ceremonies, now is the time to learn.
For sure. So I think that's the perfect segue into our conversations and some of the questions that we have. So we just wanted to talk with you today about the importance of protecting those who are immunocompromised, so our cancer patients, those in active treatment or survivors, people with diabetes or COPD, asthma, older adults, or people of any age who may have serious underlying medical conditions. And so we know that a lot of these people may have a higher risk for contracting COVID-19. So with that in mind, we at AICAF often talk about food as medicine, with a really special focus on those Indigenous foods that our ancestors lived off of for thousands of years. And so can you give us an overview of your interpretations of what food as medicine means to you, and really how it has impacted your work as a naturopathic doctor?
Thanks for the question, Chris. So, when we think of one of the biggest interventions that we can have in health and well-being is what we do every day. We have to eat. We need calories. Our brain needs sugar to process and to be alive. And so when we think of food and food as medicine, it's not just fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. It's this holistic view of the energy of the food that we're eating. Where does it come from? The fewer chemicals as possible on that food as far as eating it, right? Starting to pay attention to what's in our food, where it comes from, and supporting local. Like in Alaska, we have a huge movement to really reconnect with how we used to be in the 50s. About 50% of our food was locally sourced in the state of Alaska. Now it's less than 5%. So we've become very dependent on outside food systems, and sometimes not the best food is coming into our local grocery stores. And some of the work that we've done in Alaska has been a part of this movement called Store Outside Your Door, that really helps us understand how to hunt, fish, gather, and grow our own food. And here in Alaska, we're really fortunate because we still have a really vital food system to draw from. And not all of our Indigenous nations and communities across the country have that luxury. Some of us live in urban locations that may be harder to access these foods. And there's really this movement to reconnect with food as medicine. And as a naturopathic physician, that's one of the base tenets of the medicine is how do we eat foods that help our bodies heal. For those of us on the cancer journey or chronic disease journey, it's especially important to look at food as medicine to help us optimize our blood sugar, to optimize our body's ability to heal itself. And one of the deep tenets of naturopathic medicine is that our body has the ability to heal itself when given the proper support and nutrition. And also from a spiritual perspective, that our spirit is fed as well, and we rest. And, it's this holistic concept. And as a member of the Unangan tribe and being Unangan, we, in our values, looking at our values, food is a really important part of that, our traditional foods, and also honoring where those foods come from. So protecting the environment so that those foods stay safe and also they stay viable for generations. And this is, again, part of the challenge as we look at, the earth is at a tipping point now for us to really look at our food systems and how do we value those and how do we reintegrate those back into our lives and make sure that there's, healthy land, looking at resource development and being responsible with that so that we have a food system that makes sense and isn't polluted. And I'm really impressed lately. I want to give a shout out to the Shakopee Wahpeton Sioux community and the work they're doing with the Native Nutrition Conference, which is now, I think it's fifth annual, where, the last time I went, there were 500 people from all over Indian country that were celebrating food as medicine. And it's this big awakening. And for so many years, I felt, for those of us who've been working in Indian country for many years, sometimes I felt like voices in the desert, like, oh my God, our food is so important. And now it's like we're reclaiming our foods. And Tohono O'odham, the work that's going down there, I look at across the nation, we have amazing revitalization of our indigenous foods and our food systems, and the understanding that those foods have nourished us for generations, and we've gotten away from that, and it's made us sick. And it's especially important, AICAF helps promote prevention of cancer, early detection and awareness of risk factors for cancer, and then also optimal treatment for cancer and support. And I just feel like when we look at the cancer journey and the epidemic of cancer in Indian country and across the nation, due to often, many factors, but food is a big part of that, right? We've given up some of our prized possessions as foods. And, it's also an impact of colonization as well, where many of us were placed in areas that didn't necessarily have the best food system and we were disconnected. And as much as fry bread is a comfort food, it's a survival food because it was given to us. These are some staples that were given to us from the colonization process. And so I feel like we need to look at fry bread and some of those comfort foods as special and fun. Like in Alaska, we just celebrated Easter and we had our caliche, but it's still white bread for the most part, and we have to be really careful about that. It's a treat, enjoy it, celebrate the connection to the ceremony and the power of that history with our ancestors and how we've survived. But at the same time, we need to remember to eat more whole foods, and also, address where that food is coming from and support local. I really feel like now is a time to, have those seeds going and looking at if you have a small chunk of land, even a planter box at your house, you can grow some herbs, reconnect with food, reconnect with plants that can help you not only survive this time, but also thrive during this time.
Thank you. I appreciate that you brought up the Native Nutrition Conference. Every time I think about that, I just think of all of the amazing food that they serve during it, really walking their talk in that, just making sure that all of those indigenous and healthy foods are celebrated at their conference is amazing to see. So thank you for that. The next question we have is, can you share some more information with us about the impact that COVID-19 is having on the body? But more specifically around the immune and respiratory systems?
Sure. So, as most of us know right now, we've been hunkered down. Like here in Alaska, we're 6 weeks, 7 weeks going on of hunker down order or being home. We know that there's a lot of risks out there when we go out, that we might get exposed to the virus and we might unknowingly pass that on to an elder or somebody who's immune compromised. So the importance of wearing a mask and washing your hands and doing your best not to expose yourself or put yourself in situations where you're not physical distancing. I mean, I think all of those scripting are really important right now, especially in areas that are hotspots. And this is a period of time that is going to go on for months as we reopen businesses and start going back to some semblance of the past life, that, we have to be careful. And I feel like as communities, many of us have been deeply impacted through the cutoff of, economic supply, a lot of flights, and we've had supply chain issues with food and medicine. So it's really impacted our communities. And at the same time, I feel like one of the biggest things that I remember from a mental and emotional and spiritual standpoint is my ancestors survived the Spanish flu of 1918, right? That was a big one. And you look at the resilience that we are as Indigenous people. You know, American Indian Cancer Foundation focuses on our Indigenous community, and we have been resilient, and we will be resilient, and we have wisdom to draw from. I was just reading last night as I was preparing for the talk about how some of our cultures had very tight scripting for anybody that was sick, and they would naturally isolate them to give them the opportunity to heal and, you know, to be in a healing therapeutic environment, but also to protect the rest of the community. These are values that we have as Indigenous nations, that we respect our elders and we take care of them and we protect them. And sometimes, you know, it's not convenient to always be obsessive about washing your hands or wearing a mask or being more careful about physical distancing. But it's not just about us. And, you know, those who are immunocompromised right now, you know, many of us can be exposed to the virus and not have any symptoms, often for up to 2 weeks. And some of us may not have a huge reaction to the virus, but we could unwittingly pass that on to somebody. And I feel like that's a really important principle as we look at our values, living by our values, that we respect each other and we take care of each other. And as a part of that, we decide that we forego some of our conveniences for the sake of others who are more vulnerable. And I think that's a really important principle as we look at the deep values of the wisdom that we have from our ancestors, is that they survived and they thrived. And looking at the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, there was a peak, you know, people kind of got complacent. And then there was an even bigger peak afterwards. And we need to look at history as a lesson that we don't want to let up, that we still need to practice these public health precautions, and they're part of our value system anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
It's a little what's the word? A little scary thinking about some states that are opening and, you know, lifting some of these and seeing what the impact is going to be of that. So something that I keep watching and thinking about a lot as this kind of moves forward. And so I think that's a perfect segue into the next question. Is many of us are in week 5, 6, or even 7 of practicing physical distancing, which seem to have caused additional stress or worry for a lot of us, myself included. Just being away from family for this long, it's, you know, never happens, and so it's a new stress. And so, can you discuss the role that stress plays on maybe our immune systems in relation to COVID-19?
Sure. So, you know, we look at stress and chronic stress over time. Our adrenal glands get worn out and we have adrenal insufficiency. You know, it takes time to get there, but many of us have already had background stress in our communities. We have many things going on in our community that create stress, things related to economics and housing and food system and sanitation in some of our villages in Alaska. So these are background stressors already. And then when we add to that this fear of contracting something that we haven't had before and we're, you know, potentially afraid of, you know, that fear over time, that stress, living in fear, depletes our reserves, and it makes our immune system less strong in the ability to fight off infection or the virus itself. And so, you know, really paying attention to how stress is affecting you and coming up with strategies that work for you. Not all of us love yoga or meditation per se, but meditative techniques, ceremony, ways that we can deal with stress in healthy ways. We've seen, you know, people coping in less than healthy ways, you know, over drinking alcohol or using other substances. And we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace as well as we look at our eating habits. Sometimes comfort eating happens. And, you know, I think we're all on that journey to dealing and coping with stress, but chronic stress really, really impacts our immune system. And there's a lot of tools that you can use to help improve your stress response. But I think the most important thing is recognizing the role of stress. Stress shows up in anxiety, depression, difficulty to sleep at night, thoughts that wander lots, as far as like, you have a hard time keeping focus. These are all signs that your body is stressed. Musculoskeletal stuff, your neck, you start to see like your body's starting to show these signs. I am overstressed. And how do I strengthen my immune system? That's something we're going to be talking about as we continue today. But it's one of those where our body is incredibly resilient, and paying attention. I feel like our mind and our spirit are the most important in this whole journey right now, is looking at ways, how do I keep my mental, emotional, spiritual condition in good shape so that my body responds in appropriate ways. It's not just about, eating certain foods. It's about paying attention and being mindful. And, fortunately it's spring and we can be outside, fresh air. Nature is healing. Paying attention to, the plants, the birds that are coming back, seasonal greens that are just arriving right now, the fish in Alaska. For those of us here in Alaska, we have amazing things that are happening, and every single day it's new. The herring are showing up in Alaska right now. So, how do we pay attention? How do we connect with that? That lowers our stress response. And there are a lot of tools. And so we're going to be talking more about tools as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of these different strategies, getting outside with nature, or yoga, or meditation, mindful medicine. But can you share, and I think this is something that we're all kind of excited to learn more about, are there any indigenous herbs and medicines that can help alleviate these stressors?
Sure. So, depending upon where you're at in the country, there are medicines that we've used traditionally. And I really encourage you to explore through your local elder or herbal experts, indigenous medicine expert, traditional healer, tribal doctor. There's lots of folks, your local naturopath or master herbalist who knows indigenous medicines. And, I'm going to mention a few, but I feel like the scripting that I have always with any kind of medicine is to always make sure, like for those of us who are cancer survivors or chronic disease and we're on multiple pharmaceutical medicines, even an innocuous herbal like chamomile, which I love chamomile for stress and for helping you relax. But even chamomile can interact with some of your medicines. And so I feel like making sure you run whatever you're taking by your integrative health provider. If they're not trained in botanical medicine or traditional medicines, make sure you reach out and find somebody that is. It's not something to be afraid of. We sometimes have higher levels of scrutiny on botanicals when, up to 50% of our pharmaceuticals come from a botanical or natural analog. So these are medicines that our ancestors have used for generations and generations to help us heal. And in Alaska, we have some really great, like one of my favorites is rhodiola, which is Russian roseroot. It's now being cultivated so that we don't diminish the wild rhodiola. But in my home region, I can hike the mountains, and rhodiola is just, it's everywhere. And it's a plant that we use the roots as an adaptogen to help us deal with stress. So we make a tea from it, as well as the tops can be used, can eaten raw or can be made into a tea, or they're even traditionally they were fermented as a way to have a healthy microbiome. So when I think of dealing with stress, I think of roots, being rooted. And so another one that we can find across our nation, and they're sprouting up, especially for those of you in the warmer parts right now, dandelion is a really amazing, taraxacum is amazing plant that allows us to help deal with stress, as well as this time of year, it's a great time for supporting the liver. The liver, this is a spring, and so it's a time of the liver, and many of us traditionally as cultures would have cleanses or ceremonies this time of year that we eat certain foods, drink certain teas. And so those of us who are connected to those traditions or ceremonies, I think that's important, and figure out a way to do it in a physical distancing way. I think that there are very creative ways that we're dealing with this crisis, the social distance powwow that's been going on. I mean, we're doing amazing things that we never thought possible before. And I feel like we always want to respect the ceremony and the pieces that are sacred, but I feel like some of these pieces can be modified to have us participate virtually too, right? So I think of roots and being grounded. There are others that are just sprouting up right now. Just anything that's green and vital this time of year that's an edible in your area is rich in vitamin C, and helps support the adrenal glands. And there was a recent research article out of Oregon, I think it was Oregon State University, that showed that vitamin C and vitamin D help us in our immune system to deal with the coronavirus. And I feel like, to me, these are important things that, of course, we know food is medicine, and these plants have incredible nutrients that help us to deal with stress, as well as they have phytonutrients and chemicals in them that help us to have a healthier immune response. And so, local greens, I think of dandelion greens is also really great. So not only the root, but also the greens this time of year, those bitter greens. And all of us, I mean, as far as that across the nation, we all have our local plants. And there's a deeper principle within Indigenous knowledge and healing that within your own environment, you have the plants to deal with whatever diseases you face. And we know that, this is a pandemic, this is a virus that we haven't been exposed to before. So I think I'm always careful about saying, this antiviral will be good for that particular virus. But I would say there's a bunch of coronaviruses, and we have some incredible history, as well as for the flu, that some of these plants help our bodies deal with those viruses. And I would just say, nature, creator is wise. And so these plants that are coming up around you, and especially ones that are prolific, look out for those, because on an energetic level, those plants are things that they're speaking to you that they want to be used. And I feel like that's also something that one of our elders in Alaska, Howard Luke, who is in the spirit world now, guiding us, he said that if we don't use our traditional foods and our traditional medicines, that they'll go away. And so by being a part of our food system, especially our traditional Indigenous foods and our medicines, we keep those alive, and it's a way of respect. So using them and paying attention to them is a way of respect. So I didn't go into too much detail as far as specific plants. We'll have more resources, and we'll share more as we talk this morning. But I think the most important thing is look to your local resources. We all have different plants in our region. Like rhodiola is more of a northern adaptogen, and so not that you wouldn't use it in any other part of the world, but you also have adaptogens that help you deal with it. Ginseng-like plants. In Southeast Alaska, we have the Devil's Club Oplopanix hortum, which is one that I want to be a little bit more careful with, because it's a really, really strong plant. But that's also an adaptogen, and help us deal with chronic stress. So there's many tools in each of your regions that you can utilize during this time to deal better with stress, as well as really look to your local resources. And I'm going to give more shout outs as we talk this morning.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that, the connections to our Indigenous medicines and how we can really do that during these COVID-19 times. But I wanted to shift a little bit more and maybe share a little story. One of our coworkers and my friend Donis, who lives in Minneapolis, so in Minnesota, and obviously lives in a city, went across the street from where she lives and picked some cedar off of a tree in a park. And so thinking about, she has access and availability right there, even though she's in the city. So how can we ensure that, people all across Indian country have access and availability to the medicines in their areas? Considering that a vast number of Indigenous people live in urban areas or might not have that easy access to harvest medicines, or, you mentioned going up into the mountains. Whereas not everyone might not have that access to do that on traditional homelands, or maybe those who can't leave their homes right now, like for example, elders. So can you share a little bit more about, how we can, really get around that access and availability issues?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is there are many tools to help your immune system be strong, and also ways to help your immune system be on guard. So, like for example, simple things like many of us in our spice cabinet have some tools. Spices have been used for centuries to, not only make food taste better, but also to help combat bacteria that might be in that food or viruses, and also help our body to deal with those. So I think of things like oregano, rosemary, are really great tools. Thyme, the thyme plant has the incredible antiviral and antimicrobial properties to it. And, these are foods or spices that we can find in a local grocery store, and we can cook with them. If we have a little small planter box, it's even in Barrow right now, we're getting a bunch of sun. So it's like we're starting to be able to grow things. And you can grow a little mini herb garden with mint. Mint is a really great antiviral for tea, rosemary, thyme, oregano. So those are, like think Italian, those spices are really wonderful. And then you can, look outside your door, things that are growing right now, as far as like in some of our parts of the country. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium is coming up. It's a wonderful tool. And what I love about yarrow is it grows pretty much everywhere. And of course, you only want to harvest in areas where you're not going to have a bunch of toxins. Like you don't want to be picking it right near a road, or if there's been oil or contaminant spilled there. But even like yarrow will transplant well to a small planter box. Even if you live in an urban setting, you could grow some yarrow. And it's a great way to break a fever. And I want to speak a little bit about that as we look at our bodies, rather than living in fear in our homes. Is like, how do we strengthen our immune system? How can we eat well? How can I deal with my stress today? And there's tools that you can use throughout the day. And one of the things when I look at botanicals and the first response your body has to a virus or a bacteria is we mount a fever. And traditionally, we have lots of tools to help us optimize that fever. That fever is a natural immune response. And I think many of us have gotten spoiled, and I think it's made us weak, to be honest, because we don't want to have a fever. And it's never comfortable. I hate having a fever, but it's a natural response. And unless it's 103 or above, or if you have a compromised system that you can't spike a fever, those would be cases where you'd have to talk to your provider about how to manage that fever. But for most of us, we can mount a fever, and a fever helps the body cleanse itself of virus and bacteria. And that natural response, you don't want to blunt it, you want to support it. And so across the nation, we have great plants like yarrow that can help us mount that fever and then also break that fever eventually. But it has the antiviral properties, helps us break the fever. We can sip it as a tea, as a preventative as well. And again, all of the plants that I'm going to mention today, make sure you run it by your provider to make sure it doesn't interact with your foods. And if you're pregnant, there's only a select few of plants that I like to recommend when you're pregnant. So if you're pregnant, watch yarrow. Yarrow is one it's a strong plant as well, even though it's gentle and it's in our environment. There's a bunch of flowers also coming out right now. Elder flowers are really great to help break a fever. And if you do get sick, and within medicine, it's about prevention, right? Number one, have a strong immune system. Deal with stress in healthy ways. Have regular physical activity. Get your rest. Get your loving, and have a healthy environment and a community. And then when you do start to get sick, address it early. And I feel like a lot of us, you don't want to wait until you're sick to where you have to get put in the hospital. there's a lot of things you can use at the front end, and different teas that you can drink and have them stocked up. Like I have a whole portfolio of teas just in case something's going on. Like right now this morning, I'm drinking Urtica de Oca, some stinging nettle tea, which is just coming up. This has been dried from last year, but it's a nutritive, and again, it helps with the trace minerals and helps my body have the tools it needs to mount a proper immune response and to be healthy, right? And that's the first step, is like prevention. And then when things start to happen, you want to have some tools in your medicine cabinet, like mint, chamomile, are pretty easy to find in your local grocery store. Those are really great plants that you can use early on in a virus or a bacterial infection, but as an antiviral during COVID-19, it will help your body mount a response. A little bit of ginger tea is also really good. So these are tools that are easy to find. For those of us who have stinging nettle, start to drink that as a nutritive and as a tonic this time of year. There's a lot of tools, and the key is tapping in, and there's a couple of resources we're going to share later at the end that some of our colleagues in the Pacific Northwest have put together that are amazing, and we'll share those as well.
I know you kind of touched on this already, but I just kind of wanted to make sure that we're capturing it in our conversation. So many, if not all, of our Indigenous foods and medicines carry those stories and teachings from our ancestors, which may not always be widely shared. And I know you think about a lot of the cultural aspects of these foods and medicines, and wanting to keep them within the community so that information and knowledge is protected. But what advice would you give to someone who's interested in learning more about their local Indigenous herbs and medicines within their tribal nations?
So good question, and I really feel like I'm going to quote one of our elders here, Dr. Rita Blumenstein, who's been a friend, mentor. She is a tribal doctor, originally from Tununic. First language is Yupik. She's just this lovely elder who's still blessing us with her wisdom. And she speaks to the sacredness of our plant medicines and our ceremonies, and that this is the time to share. This is the time to honor them and keep them sacred, but also this is the time where the world, the planet, all creation needs the wisdom of our ceremonies. And I'm going to give a shout out to Dr. Michelle Kahn-John at the University of Arizona and some of the research she's doing around ceremony and Dene ceremony, and how healing and transformative that is. And one of her research projects looks at a Dene ceremony that they measured inflammatory markers, stress markers in the body before and after the ceremony, and for a period of time after, and they found marked decrease in these inflammatory markers after the ceremony. It was just, I believe it was a 2-hour ceremony, and also, less anxiety, less depression, powerful. And of course, those of us who understand ceremony and the power of spirit and mind, body, it's not a surprise at all. But for those of us who are more research driven and a little bit more reductionistic, it's like, okay, tell us, does it really work? And I feel like we're starting to find out that our ceremonies, our connection with nature and with Creator is really powerful. And those can help us to deal with incredible amounts of stress and be more resilient as tribal nations. And all of us have incredible ceremonies. Just in my home region, folks have been going out during a set time at night and drumming. And the experience, I'm just seeing folks in their experience, they have less anxiety, they have less depression, they feel empowered. And of course, I feel like it's the ability to do something, but also at that ceremony, that act, that drum, that sound is incredibly healing. And I feel like it's one that, as we move forward, reconnecting with our local ceremonies, our elders who have this knowledge, or our elders in training, or young elders, as I like to say, that we have in our communities to seek them out. I saw Linda Black Elk had a talk on ethnobotany and our indigenous medicines. I see folks across the nation sharing this wisdom, and Valerie Segrest and Elise Crone and their group in the Pacific Northwest, and the materials that they shared that is also sponsored by the Urban Indian Health Institute and the Feed 7 Generations and Grub. There's some really wonderful resources that are sourced from elders and from our cultural experts. And at the same time, we know that there are certain ceremonies and certain ways of knowing that are going to be held sacred and are only going to be for select times and for select tribal members, right? But at the same time, there is so much that can be shared and so much that can be experienced in your local area, and to really seek that out. And that's one where following this talk, we'll do our best to share some of the resources that we have, and that will be growing as more folks are sharing. But there's a lot out there, and I would just tap in. It's like, ask the question, and the elders want to share. And now's the time to connect with our elders who have a lot to share.
For sure. I know it's been interesting, and I always get really excited when I see like the Western research really catching up with the things that we've known forever. And so I always, geek out when I see new things like that. So in our next question, and I wanted to quickly touch on this, in some of our previous conversations and discussions, you mentioned a topic that really resonated with me. And you said, and asked the question, how do you decolonize a pandemic? And so we were talking about modifying ceremonies and sharing different examples with each other about maybe what we're doing or what our families are doing around ceremony and physical distancing, really. And so can you share more on Indigenous ceremonies and how people can really modify them to be safer?
Yeah, so this is really coming up as a big deal, and I know for many different faiths, I think people have had to really stretch their mind around meeting virtually. For those in the faith community, having church over Zoom isn't necessarily the same. Folks have done ceremonies where you can drive into and participate, at least experience that in a setting where you're in your cars and you're physical distanced. There's some very creative ways, and I mentioned this the social distance powwow that is growing across our nation, and some of those videos I'm seeing like 3 million likes. I mean, just like amazing, and I feel like there's so many of us who are encouraged, and we get to share ceremony, and those dances are some of them thousands of years old. They connect us to a spiritual place, and I feel we're learning that we can do this virtually. And yes, it's not the same as in person, but having a sweat lodge right now is not necessarily the best idea because of the possible transmission of the virus. And so, perhaps you can do a virtual sweat lodge where you can have your own sweat if there's the ability to have a sweat in your own space, and then connect with folks afterwards and process that ceremony. There's ways that we can modify. And I feel like with Zoom and with these other medium that aren't expensive or are free, not all of us have electronics though. And I would just say that's also a barrier, but we have a phone, and maybe some of us don't have a phone, but I would just say, often we have access to something that connects us with others, and we can be creative. For those of us who pray, we can pray on the phone, we can pray virtually, we can connect. And at this point, we need to practice those. I do feel like on a spiritual level, this is a really important time to talk about that we, exercise our spiritual traditions, our faith, and understand that affects our mind, that affects our emotions, and those affect our body. And, as we look at our thoughts, and if we're always fretting and worrying, that sets up a cascade of chemicals in our body that create stress and inflammation in our body. And just like Dr. Michelle Conjon and the work that she's done shows that these ceremonies, these ways of releasing and letting go, are really important, and they help us to have a healthier outlook, and that healthier outlook actually changes our body's chemistry so that we can actually respond to these threats. And perhaps a ceremony is to go out and collect a spruce branch and boil it in your house, and that also has an antiviral effect in your house, right? Smudging has antiviral, antibacterial properties to it, so we can do our own ceremony in our house, and then connect with others and talk about that, and do it in a collective via distance. There's lots of different creative ways that we can enhance our mental, emotional, spiritual well-being, as well as improve our immune response.
So as we're wrapping up, I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer some of the questions that are coming up in the chat. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to share some more resources. I know you mentioned a couple already as we've gone along throughout this past hour, just different resources that are coming out from the naturopathic community. And I know that you and I will follow up and send out a list of links to resources so that folks have access to these. We'll share it on Facebook, and we'll also get that out to everyone. So if you just wanted to share any other ones that you had.
Sure. And, again, I want to honor the local wisdom that exists in each of our communities. There are traditional healers, tribal doctors, folks who are gifted in ceremony, and ways that we can help improve our immune systems and our mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. So I just want to give a shout out to everyone that's doing that work in your local community. There are a lot of resources and a lot you can do, and be empowered rather than sitting in fear in your house. Take action every single day, be physically active, drink wonderful teas, like seasonal teas, like I'm drinking this nettle tea this morning. It's like, drink some really wonderful dandelion tea, or whatever your local plants are coming up. It's like, they want to be celebrated. Enjoy them. As I shared, Valerie Segrest and Elise Crone and their team, along with the Urban Indian Health Institute and GRUB in the Pacific Northwest, has immune and respiratory herbs resource for tribal communities. I feel like it's an incredibly brilliant production that really compiles a lot of the wisdom that we have from our indigenous nations. It is a little bit more formatted to Pacific Northwest, but I'm sure there will be more local resources similar to this as we move forward, because I do feel like there's a reawakening of connection to our indigenous medicines and knowledge, and honoring that. And unfortunately, colonization, as we look at decolonizing, colonization devalued a lot of our indigenous foods and our ceremonies and our medicines. And, unfortunately, some of us, through this reaction to colonization, I like to say it's kind of a form of Stockholm syndrome. We have also devalued our own ways. And, if it's not a pharmaceutical or come in a package, we're skeptical of it, and at the same time, our elders are like, these are important medicines and foods, and we need to celebrate these. And for us to understand that, and the Western science standpoint, from a naturopathic perspective, we love the research. It's like, how does that work? How does echinacea help your immune system when you're getting a cold or flu? How does it help us mount that response? How does yarrow help us break a fever? That's all amazing wisdom. And also understanding that, it may not have a blockbuster drug title, but that doesn't make it not powerful. And, in fact, vitamin C has gotten a lot of press, IV vitamin C. Of course, having enough vitamin C regularly helps your immune system. But if you're really sick, administering it via IV has been shown to be really helpful, even during COVID-19. And so there's really neat research. And at the same time, it's not a sexy drug, so it hasn't gotten as much press. And I really feel like we need to really look deep within and why we don't value our own wisdom. And then all of a sudden, maybe a drug company comes in and takes that botanical and makes a blockbuster drug, and then all of a sudden it becomes popular. But I'm like, we knew it all the time. It's like, we're learning that these medicines, these ways of our ancestors, are incredibly powerful. And now is the time to reconnect with those and reawaken those.
Yeah, I just wanted to share we're doing around, really addressing stress and stuff in the workplace at AICAF is every Friday we've been doing a virtual smudge. And so just taking 10 minutes out of the day in the morning to really, start our day in a good way and, reflect on the week and just, share what we want to share and get all of those things out and, have a good weekend with it as well. So that's just something that we've been doing, and everyone always pulls out their little smudge bowls and there's just, smudge going in all of everyone's Zoom. So it's always funny to see, but that's just what we're doing. So I think in closing, just one last question that we've really been asking folks is, during these times of uncertainty, what words of wisdom do you want to leave us with to support and encourage our tribal communities?
So, I really feel that there is a lot of hope, and we have gone through many epidemics. As we look at our generations, our ancestors, we are incredibly strong, and we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot. We've learned to socially isolate. We've learned to look within and to address our dis-ease by looking at local sources. How can we address that locally? And be empowered, the small things that you can do each day, and also the things that you take away. Like for those of us who are smokers, it's a good time to quit or cut down, because that raises your risk. If you're over drinking and responding in that method, today is a great day to make that shift and make new decisions. To reach out and ask for help, to process, for those of us who aren't emoters, to find healthy ways, maybe watch a tearjerker and cry if you need to, let your emotions out, be healthy. Physical distancing doesn't mean you don't get outside. And I would say get outside every single day. Have fresh air, sunshine. Vitamin D is really important for your immune system. So, recommendations are now to take vitamin D, most likely, if you live in the northern climes, unless you're in Arizona, or maybe you have a better sun opportunity, but not everybody in Arizona is out in the sun. So again, be empowered and then also pay attention to your thoughts, pay attention to your spirit, and tune in and have ceremonies, ways that you tune in, mindfulness, prayer, your spirituality, really important right now, because that affects your body, that affects your mind. And, we're going to get through this, and we will talk about this to our next generations as how we learn to thrive. And at the same time, I feel like we've got so much wisdom that we can use from the past. Those are in the elders that are around us. So reach out to an elder, make sure that they have food, that they have support. If they don't have some of the teas or medicines, you can bring those to them. And then also you can talk to them on the phone or through FaceTime or through Zoom, so that you can get that wisdom download. Our elders are really important to protect. Those are more vulnerable. Make sure you're careful by wearing a mask and practice physical distancing, but reach out, be a part of the community, and that's going to help us stay healthy during this time.
Thank you. So I think we'll go ahead and move on to some of the questions that we have in the chat and on the Facebook. So if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask, now's the time. And so the first one we have is from Facebook. So it says, what can collectively be done to help the Navajo nations? And then a follow-up to that is, are any of your organizations providing assistance? So I think for us at the American Indian Cancer Foundation, it's really been about providing a lot of the resources around, how cancer is impacting COVID, or vice versa, COVID impacting cancer. And then another thing that we've recently done is provide bandanas for face masks. And we also have another order coming in for face masks as well that folks are able to request. And it's all on our social media and our webpage to go and sign up for those. So Gary, if you want to share any information on that one as well.
Yeah, well, I would just say again, look to, as far as Navajo Nation, you have amazing ceremonies and medicines. I mentioned Dr. Michelle Kanjan and the work on the ceremony that the research shows that there's ways to promote immune system health and the stress response. I think that there are ways that folks can practice these ceremonies safely through physical distancing and get the benefits of them. I think of some of the issues on Navajo Nation related to sanitation and water and access to ways to stay healthy. I think that's helping us understand the need, but I would just say looking at local resources to build upon, and I just feel that there is so much wisdom as we look at our traditions and our ceremonies and our foods and our plants that will give us hope. And I pray for Navajo Nation because I know right now that they're disproportionately affected with COVID-19, and it's giving us opportunities to be able to in the future as well do more work in prevention in working with them and supporting them.
Right. So the next question we have is from Zoom, and it says, is it possible to be experiencing stress without feeling like I am? I don't feel the kind of stress that I think other people are, and I'm okay with that. But I also feel like if I'm not feeling it, that maybe it's laying dormant and will show up in a different way later on.
So I would say that we all experience stress differently. Some of us will get through a situation and we're so much in the stress response that blunts some of the, we don't feel tired, we don't feel depressed, we're wired, we want to go. And then all of a sudden, once we start to let off, it's like, oh my God, I'm really stressed, I'm exhausted, and the process is later. So some of us are early on processors, some of us process in the middle, some of us process afterwards. And to honor the fact that we're all different that way. In my practice, my clinical practice, a lot of, especially men would come in and say, I'm not stressed at all. And of course you take your blood pressure and it's like blood pressure's through the roof. And then all other signs, your neck is completely in knots. I'm like, your body is stressed. You just haven't tuned in. And I feel like having a regular mindfulness practice each day where you can tune in, even just going for a walk in the woods, those are great ways to tap in, and we're all going to deal with it differently, and that's okay. So if you're rolling with it, you have good coping mechanisms, that's awesome. But I also understand that, if you're in shambles and you are crying right now, it's okay. Let those emotions go and reach for support.
So with that, I don't think we have any more questions. I just wanted to throw this out there that the recording will be shared on our Facebook, as well as our webpage at acaf.org. I wanted to say thank you to Dr. Gary Ferguson. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us, and a big thanks to everyone else who joined us for today's conversation in this series of our COVID-19 and cancer chats. And yeah, so we hope that you will all join us for our next COVID-19 chat. We'll share information on the next topic and speakers soon via our social media. So thank you.
Agasakung, thank you for having me, and be well, be safe, and take good care. Dakota Gali.
Thank you.